think for time's sake, I'll ask one question and then we'll turn to the audience and ask if they have any questions. So, as you've shared today, you spoke about changing mindsets, asking adults to be living in the here and now, to be aware of the sociocultural context of a community before we bring in and adapt an approach, a philosophy, a practice, to fight for equity and think about play as an equalizer, and to think about play in the context of trauma as healing and coping and so on. When we think about it, all of these pieces that you've talked about and more, and we think about educational reform and change, it's such hard work, right? It is such hard, long-term work. And it really requires a vision, it requires intentional strategy, it requires sustained leadership, sustained collaboration, and we have to work with the individual, teachers, families, programs, systems. It's a lot. It's a big, heavy lift that is long-term. And when we think about supporting educational reform, we want to think about sustainability. So that's the question I want to open up to you. You've talked about some aspects of what you're doing in your work to support the sustainability of this work so that it can blossom and be as deep and as impactful across an ecosystem as we need it to be. But what else? What can we make visible? What can we share about? What are your recommendations in the work, thinking of your sphere of influence? What you're doing already to build in sustainability and that long-term work, or what you recommend is important to really think about bringing this as an educational model for reform.
Sorry, I did not question. Was it for me?
Sure.
Okay. I think it's a very good question, Julie. And I think in my work in equity, for example, if I think sustainability, first and foremost, I think getting buy-in, because I think nothing happens unless we have the buy-in. Now, buy-in not only from, and it has to come from at all levels, from leadership, executive management, because if we, we talk equality and we talk, gender equality, we talk racialized equality, but really, if you look around globally, it's not there yet. We aren't where we want to be. So when we are at the point where you have, at leadership level, it's there and you get that degree of support. And I take it out of the organization as well, not only within management, but politically as well. The cooperation and collaboration of community partners. So basically, it's looking at all stakeholders and having conversations with them and getting that support for it to work. That's just one element of that will ensure sustainability. I think thoroughly researching what it is that you want to implement and being aware of, looking at all the assumptions, all the implications, all the things that can go wrong prior to implementation, and sort of putting those looking at scoping your risks, looking at addressing those prior to start. And, I can go into like a whole host, but yeah, I can, first and foremost, I would say buy-in and looking at all the factors that affect your implementation before start.
If you look at lifestyles, that's a very interesting phenomenon. Young men here in China have the same hairstyles as young men and teenagers in Amsterdam and in Toronto. Isn't it interesting? Girls are dressed in the same manner. Now, because they all think that's a good idea. I think Anji is such a perfect idea that almost by its own force, it will explode and will be taken over. I believe in that. And if you look at our audience, we all go home with that same message and say, gosh, we are there and listen, this is what we should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, we started out I started our school with the intention of changing state policy so that all schools, all preschools, birth to age 5 in our state are free to all families regardless of race or income. And also we want to revolutionize public education in America, which is why we're extending our school all the way through 12th grade. We think there's a new way that our children need to learn. We know that. And there's a lot out there written about it, and researched or tried, including what Ms. Chung is doing, and we think we have the capacity to pull it off. But to do so, we also connected with policymakers to ensure that they're dialed into everything that we do. We send a quarterly update to everyone that's very in deep and depth. I think I've sent those to Jesse and Chelsea as well. So people always know what we're doing. We've got the media involved in our work. We've got over 400 volunteers have been involved in our school. We have 36 partnerships with major entities within our community. We're also very transparent about what we do. We tell people what we do, what we're succeeding at, where we're not succeeding. And we're also very open about the relationships that we have. We do not want to corner the market on preschool education or Anji Play. And so we are an open book. And we want everyone to come see what we're doing, similarly the way that Ms. Chung wants to see it happen worldwide and right here in China. But also the other big piece for us is the resource base. We spend time going from West Coast to East Coast to talk to philanthropists so they could start paying attention to what's happening, so that when we start reaching out to get a broader resource base to support us, that resource base will be there to support others and their growth as well. And we're also willing to share with people who those people are. So the more that Anji Play grows, both in our country and the United States, here and around the world, it'll contribute to the sustainability because it will start to impact policy and things will start to change once more people see the importance and value of it.
I can only add a little to these comments, but it's actually hard for me to sit at the end of 3 days and think, why wouldn't everybody implement Anji? It's so the basis of humanity and what we need. But I do think a big piece of it are connecting, and I live in a city right now in New York where this should be a natural, and we have every force against us, as other people do. But I've hooked up with colleagues here, and we've talked about how to get around the system. There are going to be systems that aren't going to let you in and aren't going to let you do this, but we've talked about the Madison presentation was really critical to us. Like, oh, we have parks in New York with space. Our libraries don't have space, but our parks do. So I think also taking the energy of so many colleagues and then saying, how can we do this, and staying away from the naysayers, because it's so hard for me to think, why wouldn't anybody just run with this? So I think that's one piece. The other power that I think Anji has is if you think of the disciplines that are here today, you could say this is an education conference, but it's so much more. Many of us are coming from mental health, from design, from anthropology, you name the disciplines here. The data converges from lots and lots of places to say for good mental health and functioning, you have to start here. And so I think that lends ourselves to think about how does that feed into sustainability, because it's not one sole community, it's not just the academics, just the practitioners, as people would say, but it's all levels, and then using that with the policymakers. And on that research side, I do keep pondering that question of, how do you do the research without killing it? Because certainly in America, we have a great way of killing it in child development. But that mixture of really thick descriptive research, which I think is part of the many beauties of what you're doing here, Ms. Chang, in your mind of, we've got to document this and show that it's coming from the children. That kind of description going with the other kinds of research that policymakers insist on in many places and funders insist on. We have to play in that space whether we like it or not. But again, I think we can figure out how to get around that in ways that are still true to the beauty of Anji Play, and speak to those connections that we absolutely need to make this sustainable.
Can I add one thing? So Beth, if you could stand up so everybody can see you. So Beth Grau is at the University of Wisconsin. I mentioned one of the top research entities in the world, but she's come on board with 3 different entities within the university to do a longitudinal evaluation of our children in our school. And so she has the ability to define and design this research model. So I'm hoping, I know she'll be working closely with Anji Play and others probably in this room, and we've been invited to secure funding for that so we can get a start.
That's great. Thank you. So we have 10 minutes left, and given that, I want to make sure that we invite those of you in the audience to share your thoughts, what this has provoked you to think about, to question, what comments you have for the speakers. I guess do we have anyone who wants to ask a question or just share a thought about what this panel made you think about, what it inspired for you to take back with you?
Are there any rich people in the audience who don't
People
like
are
their money?
People are tired. Ms. Chen? Okay. Ms. Chen? Okay, there we go.
我在下面一直在听，一直很感动。特别是刚才托瓦也讲到了，我们这个幼儿教育不仅仅是我们的这个幼儿教育这一块，我们需要去影响。
We not only need to build good schools, we need to build communities, so we can actually create a wonderful ecology of Anji. Thank you so much.
Do you want, can you use this so we can hear you? Oh, okay.
I'm deeply thankful and deeply moved, and particularly by the words of Tova Klein and my understanding that we're not simply talking about early education, but we're talking about the impact that our work will have on the community. So for that deep understanding, I have to express my deep thanks.
Thank you. Okay, in the back here. Oh, over here. Oh, okay, very good.
Thanks very much. I think this is a good, it's another alternative. We've coming from Africa and Tanzania in particular, but it's another opportunity to raise the standards and quality of learning processes to our children. But I would like to ask if there are more time to, or more room to do some researches to make sure that it has, this model has standardized and quality improvement kind of procedure, so that if it will be applied in other areas, it will have the same test as it is applied here in Anji. So I would wish to get some reservations as to how can this be done, or if it has been done, then let it be assured that we can use without any misinterpretation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe I can touch on that one. I think one of the beauty that I saw with Anji Play is the ability, and I think I said it when I spoke, to be conceptually, contextually adjusted to suit the environment. So I think, yeah, research is great, and it does take time. So one of the things I think Nico pointed to as well, it's, you know, it's the now, and you can start now. So it is a model that I see that you can embrace, adjust, and adapt. When I spoke about buy-in earlier, I also meant in terms of like changing mindsets. And what we heard some parents spoke today in that there was in the beginning some pushback because it's not easy to look at your child at play in a situation that is risky, where they can get hurt. So those are the things when I mentioned buy-in, you're talking about a cultural or paradigm shift, a changing cultural mindset. So, and I think Cass, I'll raise your point now for you, because I think when Cass spoke at that session, when we had a small group session, she was saying, yes, the materials are great, but it's not that you have to wait until you acquire those materials, because it's about getting things from the environment that you can use, that you have, to manipulate for your use, you know? So definitely, I think Angie Play can be adapted and adopted.
There's one here, okay?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I just graduated. I don't know a lot about education, but I went to the primary school, the kindergarten. I just bumped up. Like I could never think like the child, like those kids have this kind of environment to grow up. Like I had a thought before. I saw in China, it will never have some kind of place like kids heaven. Like they just, be free, do everything they want. It's like the dream childhood I'd like to have, but I missed it. But I see the kids they have now. I'm so glad. And really thank you, Ms. Chen. Yeah, I really touched about Angie Play. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing and for giving the inspiration to those of us who wonder how we can one day experience Angie Play. You say you never imagined, and you went there, and it blew your mind. Thank you. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I would just add to the question about Africa and the session that Rona was referring to, this discussion one evening. I think for many of us, the vision is big, and Ms. Chang, we appreciate that your vision is so big, and keep it going, because those primary schools need this. But it's important for us to also think of starting small wherever we are, because Ms. Chang actually started not up here where we're seeing it today, but with a very basic question of nobody's happy. The children aren't happy, the teachers aren't happy. It was such an important thought, observation. But to think about starting small, because with those demonstration centers, and it doesn't have to be perfect and the most beautiful and the best materials, but starting small and bringing parents in to see it, as this young man was just saying, right? For almost all of us, I imagine for everybody here, that you remember your first visit, and we're in it, and hopefully we've seen other good programs in our countries, but there was a change. I was changed by Angie, even though I actually thought this could go on somewhere, but then when I saw that it did go on somewhere, I couldn't believe it. I think showing people that, and we heard it from principals who talked here on our visits here, of bringing parents in to do it for themselves, to see it for themselves, teachers to play. So when you start with something, you're starting, and then you're bringing people in to do it, like the Madison people said as well. And then the word kind of spreads. That's, I think, what has happened in Angie. That's my understanding of it. And we need to remember you have to start somewhere. Otherwise, we get too overwhelmed and the naysayers get in our way. But seeing it is what matters very much. And I suspect that's going to happen for many of you in Africa. And I can't wait to hear next year or the year after about it moving along.
So as this is the final session and we're just about at the end, I thought it might be nice to just have each of you say one brief maybe your small takeaway, something that you're walking away and thinking, I'm going to be inspired by this next week. Maybe it's a question, maybe it's a practice, maybe it's a relationship, but one takeaway that you're bringing back with you.
I cannot do that. There are thousands of takeaways.
Yes, of
Almost
course.
thousands. I'm a slow learner. I need at least weeks to process everything. But again, there are so many things I would like to reflect upon and take away and share with others. It's phenomenal.
I think for me it would be play is power, and play is powerful.
For me, it's been incredible people that I've met since I've been here, and I just feel really grateful that we're able to bring this to our community, to do something to unleash the potential of our children, to learn from outstanding educators like Ms. Chung and others that are here. So it's been a moving experience, and I think Carol and Itez, we're just ready to get back home and go to work. So thank you.
I think when I get through the tears, because that's what's going to happen for me from this, it's hard to pick. I'm going to remember this moment with Nico and I of a little girl at one of the schools going like this to us. And we looked, and this was after a conversation. She said, "What's your name?" We told her our names. We said, "What's your name?" She told us her name. She said, "How old are you?" I told her. Nico told her. We said, "How old are you?" She said, "I am 8." We knew we thought there weren't 8-year-olds there, but we realized that she has some of the language. And then she went like this. And she did it to both of us. And I think we might have maybe imitated it back. We weren't really sure what the interaction was. And she smiled and stood up and she sang a song in English to us. That, I think, is the essence of children and heart.
And I want to share that when I look around and I think about all of us together, I think about the power of this learning community, that we're teaching one another, we're learning from one another, and we're on a journey now together with many connection points. And I just want to thank you all so much for everything that you shared today, and thank you for your wonderful thoughts and reflections and questions.